Hello.
Well, hello. Welcome
Hello.
to episode number
Episode
three.
number three. I'm your echo. Okay.
3.
Is that how you do threes?
In sign language.
They get
Do like
definitely
this.
dirt. Oh no, that's what psychopaths do.
It's like 1, 2, 3. It's like, uh-oh.
Run for the hills.
Dating question number 1. It's like, count to 3. 1, 2, 3.
Which is
1,
a great
2, 3.
segue to our topic today. One that David and myself absolutely do not want to do on this podcast, but are yet forcing ourselves to do it anyway.
Because it's important to step into that discomfort. Only place we grow, right?
I feel like it's more terrorizing for you because for all of those who are tuning in, before we pressed record, David had asked me like 6 times, like, what are we talking about? And I'm like, relationships and emotional vulnerability. And then like 5 minutes later, what are we talking about? I'm like, oh my gosh, he's like,
but what do you mean vulnerability? Like that.
What is vulnerability? What does that mean? And we honestly were having a hard time figuring out what aspect of relationship, because it, kind of like what we talked about in episode 2, by the way. Go check it out. Shameless plug. We talked about traumas. Yeah, it's the lead-in. We talked about traumas and how it really affects decisions and making patterns. And so there's definitely patterns in relationships, and catching those patterns are key for growth, so that you're not, I guess you could say, bonding with or attaching or just absolutely loving all the trauma of being with somebody that you're just not really supposed to be matched with.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there. And if you haven't, you are one lucky duckling.
And it's not just relationships, but a lot of things in life, because that's kind of what I mentioned in the last episode as well, is like I would get to a certain point in my life of success, and then it would self-sabotage, and then get back there and self-sabotage. And it would happen in relationships too. Get to a certain point in this relationship of connection, and then we sabotage it. So it's definitely seeing that there is a pattern and then trying to understand why that pattern is there, I think, is a key.
But there comes a point, and one thing I really wanted to bring into this episode, which David does not really want to do subconsciously, is to not talk about the awareness of the patterns, because I feel like we did talk about that in episode 2. But it's really what that question that people come up to me, at least, a lot about, and I feel like you can relate, anyone can relate to this, if someone asks you, how did you do it? Right? How did you have this success? How did you publish this book? Or how did you, whatever the question may be, it's literally not, how did you get the steps to get there? Because really, people don't care too much about that. They may be curious, but what they really care about is what got you to take the courage to actually move and keep moving and finally have that end product or result. And so I feel like that's really the question we're asking here is, how did you do it in terms of getting to a relationship, identifying what's wrong with that relationship, leaving that relationship or continuing that relationship, and healing from it, right? So it's like, how did you do it is really the question, is how did you get that courage? Not necessarily what are the steps that you took.
Yeah, and that's, so like, as you mentioned, that's a harder question for me, because I do come at things very analytically, right? And I'm trying to figure out why this pattern is happening, or what's going on, and how I can take specific action steps to avoid it in the future, which, it doesn't always work per se, because I've had a handful of relationships, and though each one has been very different, they all end for one reason or another, right? So currently single, and I will say each relationship gets better than the last one. And I definitely seem to be attracting different types of people, but there are certain themes that come up throughout these relationships.
Right.
And it's not just personal relationships, but business relationships as well, right?
Relationships is such a broad word, but whenever we say relationships, people automatically default to romantic relationships.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. It's like, why did you do that? Because a lot of people it's such a core identity to something that either they're missing or that they have. And I know for like people in my family, those that have been married for decades and those that have been single for decades, and then those who have had both. Like whenever you say relationships, it doesn't matter across the board. They go, so have you gotten to know someone? Are you in any relationships? How's your romantic life? And it's automatically in this umbrella term of relationships. Relationships can mean anything.
Okay,
and
accurate.
I think, to what you were kind of hinting at, I want to put it out there, is that patterns in one type of relationship also can bleed into many different relationships.
So often. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so really, again, like, we talked a lot about the awareness piece of understanding those patterns, and especially through trauma. But when it comes to, okay, we got the awareness piece. Yeah, I definitely block things. I definitely like have shame with stuff. And so how did I take those steps towards healing? So I kind of want to ask you, I kind of want to push you.
We're starting with me.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we totally are. So the reason why I want to ask you first is because this is a hard topic for you to talk about, like to even think of ideas and stories. Like those were things you were asking me before. There's a lot of anxiety behind that. And so I'm going to sit here and be accountable for you and be like,
so thoughtful.
Hey, in a very like evil type way.
She's like, it's on camera, so you have to do it.
Should make this live, so feel the pressure. No, really.
We could do that in a future episode, like have a live cast and like have some of our viewers there.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Side note. So, see, that guy's derailing. Like, no, this is me changing the subject. Talk about something else. I got friends that do that too. Like, I'm on to you. So,
shiny object. Look over here.
So, tell us a time where, yes, you identified the pattern, you knew what was happening, and your logic is kicking in, and you're like, okay, what are the steps I need to take? You find those steps and you start taking them. But what is that courage that really came out that said, I need to do something different?
So, let me think on that one. Because I had some ideas, but I think this is going to go in a different way other than what I wanted to talk about before.
For you.
Because one thing, a consistent pattern for me was I was always getting into I always give more in relationships than I take. So I find partners who like to take more than they give. And that's, I imagine it's a very common thing. People who are givers, they tend to attract takers, right?
Right.
And by not being aware of, okay, I'm giving more, and I'm not giving back, it leads into some pretty bad things. And we talked about trauma blocking before, where I don't necessarily see that it's an unhealthy give-take dynamic, right? So in business, especially when I was working in retail, I was working my guts out. I would work off the clock. I would like hide from working because you can only work 40 hours a week or you get in trouble because you're not allowed to take overtime, but they give you more work than can be done in 40 hours a week. So I'm like hiding and doing stuff off the clock. I'd come in at like midnight and do floor resets and do all this stuff. Oh yeah, but I had a really high functioning store. And that's just the nature of that retail environment, is that they will take everything that's designed to get as much work out of an employee before they quit. So I was also in a relationship at that time with someone who was clinically narcissistic, but it's called borderline personality disorder, right? And so I would give, and didn't get much back, right? And it got to this point where it was just explosively fighting. There was such a like she stole my car at one point, like towards the very end. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so actually even before that, she totaled one of my cars, and then should have broken up with her then, but didn't.
Some red flags there.
Few red flags, right? I was like, no, it's okay. It's just material things. It's not a big deal.
Okay, you just took my car. It's all
And
good.
then I would set boundaries, right? On like, okay, no, you can't drive my car without me. And then so one day she just up and stole it. So
You
big
can't
red
tell me
flag,
what to
right?
do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you got the red flags, and then what did you decide to do at that point?
So at that point, the benefit was I had the friends that I lived with were super supportive. And they were like, hey, we understand you want to be in this relationship, but she sucks pretty bad. And so either we're kicking you out, we're kicking both of you out, or we're kicking her out.
Oh, so she was living with you?
Yeah, we all live together. Because in this day and age, you can't afford a place on your own with any space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it actually took the advice of someone who told me,
right.
They told me that a relationship ending doesn't mean you're a failure. A failed relationship doesn't mean you're a failed person. And so seeking that advice from a mentor, having the support of the friends around me, that gave me more strength to be able to say, okay, I need to sever this toxic relationship and get out of here.
Right.
Did that answer the question?
I think that piece of advice is really actually good, is really looking at things differently than what you used to. And that's part of the awareness piece. But like for people who ask, how did you do it? Right. They're just in a certain, like, I can't figure it out because they keep looking at it in a certain perspective, right?
And
avoid failure.
Correct. Yeah. And I was associating a breakup with a failed relationship, or that I failed in giving enough that I could make this relationship work.
Exactly. And it's always this kind of, and it's part of the reason why, one of the reasons why we started this podcast is to normalize uncertainty and failure, as it's a part of the journey. Embrace it. And so even when it comes to like publishing a book, you know, people would ask me, how did you do it? Like they're not wanting to jump into it because they're so afraid of the failure. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know what? You could fail at publishing a book. You could fail at a marriage. You could fail at starting a freaking car in the morning. Turns out there's an inside joke there. So things like that. It's like you could literally fail at absolutely everything. You might as well fail at something you're choosing rather than something that you're just on autopilot with, really.
Yeah.
Because for me, you know, when it comes to that, how did you do it? I was in a marriage that I, in a way, kind of jumped into and was very codependent with, because I have this pattern in my family with alcoholics and so on, that it's very codependent type of place. Before all the counseling and the Al-Anon, that's what we did. And so I was in a very codependent relationship where I was the codependent and he was the dependent. And it was so many red flags, and it was so stupid. And so I did the relationship. I was married, and you know, I did it because on paper he looked like he was the right thing and would make my family proud of me. Right? It was kind of like that keeping up with the Mr. Joneses thing that I'm usually not about, but that was that one thing where I was like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. It'd be great. It'd be awesome. It was like this stupid fantasy romantic idea. And then it became emotionally abusive, and then it became very controlling, and then it was a lot of me taking care of him so that he can control me, and it was a very toxic deal. And so finally, a lot of things happened in between all of that, but finally the how I got through it was one day I finally said, I'm literally sacrificing who I am to stay connected to someone who treats me like they don't love me. And so I was like, if I was outside of myself, and this is where they say, if you were your own best friend, what would you tell your best friend kind of situation? It's that different perspective. That's really what they're painting. So I had to take a different perspective and say, I would tell myself you need to divorce. And we did divorce amicably as friends, and that was great. But the how is really taking the courage to actually say, we need to divorce. Right? But after saying it, it was such a peaceful thing. And it was so weird because it was a kind of a divine thing, actually, because when I said it, he felt the same thing that day. And so we both came to it at the same time because we both decided to take courage in that. and really take different perspective.
Okay.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, you really need to take a different perspective of, this is going to be a failure and I'm going to be okay with that. Because I don't know what's going to happen after this, but I know that I am a resourceful person and I can figure it out. Right. And everybody can figure it out. Right. And I think it's for you, it's kind of like that mental buildup that you can figure it out.
Right.
Because it's that uncertainty, right, that we're all so afraid of.
Yeah. And so a lot of people, though, maybe it's not so bad, right? It's not at the extremes of where we were at. Right. And they're just in a marriage that, or another relationship that has its normal ups and downs. So did you have, for me personally, so I'll say after that relationship, which I actually was able to then see, that one really woke me up to a lot of different patterns in my life, where it was retail. I was giving too much. It was relationships. It was even some friendships that I was giving way too much. A failed business venture before that. It was the same kind of thing where I didn't know the word narcissism back then, but it was the same kind of thing. So that ending of that relationship was a huge wake-up call, and I was able to start putting steps forward into learning how to actively set boundaries, learning how to attract people in my life that were that had a growth mindset, that were actively doing better things in the world. Right. And it led to a more recent relationship where we were really good for most of our relationship at work, hitting a problem, figuring out why there was tension in the relationship, discussing it openly and honestly, because that was another part of being in that toxic relationship, is we had to lie to each other about everything. So I knew that I couldn't say or do certain things at certain times, otherwise it was going to trigger an aggressive outburst. She was hiding a ton of things from me because she didn't feel that it was in my best interest to know it, right? So in future relationships, we definitely got to the point where it was like, we could talk openly. We could discuss things. As painful as it was, we chose not to hide things from each other. So what are some active steps you think people can take who maybe are in a struggle in their relationship, but they're not ready to end the relationship? Or how do we know the difference between we should have a divorce or break up or sever business ties, or we just are at a stepping stone we need to discuss and work this out?
You know, something that I found to be extremely true, I actually learned like 2 years ago, and I wish I learned it like 10 years ago. But I think it's such a great piece of advice, and I've heard it in many different ways, but the one way that sticks out the most is Matthew Hussey. He is this influencer I really like. He's an author and so on, and he really helps women find the right man through confidence rather than finding any man. Right? And so he dives into a lot of the topics that we talk about, actually. But one thing that I thought was so profound and so true, he says, basically, on day one is usually the reason on the last day of the relationship as to why the relationship ended. So on day one, if you're finding things that if you're paying attention, if you're finding things that are there, that will be the same behavior in 10 years from now. And so really,
if not amplified, probably, right?
So really paying attention, and again, it's kind of like the awareness piece of it in a way, but really paying attention to day one and imagining that 10 years from now, and really asking yourself that question: is this a problem you want and are willing to have or not? Because we are going to always have problems. So choose your problems rather than choosing necessarily, like, you want to have your wants and your needs, of course.
Right.
But paying attention to the problems as well and saying, I am okay with these problems. I'm not okay with these problems. Like, I'm okay with the problems of someone being uncertain if they're going to go with this direction or that direction in life, in a way, or in a job, or like on driving. But I am not okay with someone who's going to physically hurt me.
Right.
So really understanding what problems you are willing to accept in a flawed human being
Mhm.
and what you are not willing to accept. And that's really important. And so it's kind of seeing those red flags. Like if you're out on a date or if you're out on a business meeting
Mhm.
and they treat the waiter or the waitress like shit.
Yeah, I was gonna actually mention that. I feel like it's so
That
cliche, but it's so telling.
that is a big test for me. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let's see how that goes. Or even just ordering anything or talking to a retail person or just seeing how they act with somebody bumping into them on the street. Anything.
Mhm.
Really paying attention to their
So
behavior.
have your friend be the waitress and test
Right?
your potential
Go where
partner.
your friends work.
And
And
just
also
see how if they
really,
can make everything wrong
right?
at dinner and see how the person responds.
Yeah, and really
Sneaky.
listen to your friends and or
Mhm.
colleagues, whether it's business or relationships, because my mother was trying to tell me something about my ex-husband, like this really concerned me, and I was like, oh no, but codependency wants to come in and say it's okay, and
Mhm.
she just was like, oh, she's not going to respond to this, so I won't say anything anymore, and so
Yeah.
she didn't, and I just shut that down, I guess, and so really being open to what people tell you, and I wouldn't say always believe them, but half believe them at least. Pay
Yeah, and
attention to
sit
what
on
they're
it.
saying. Yeah,
Mhm.
really pay attention to what they're saying. So when you have an outing with this person or with this business person again, and that behavior picks up, you now notice it. Like
Mhm.
really pay attention to that stuff. And again, it kind of
And
comes with that awareness piece.
and then I like actually what you said is don't focus on it. Decide if it's something that is a deal breaker or not a deal breaker. Because if it's not a deal breaker, don't focus on it. Like
Right?
if it's something that's not that bad, like if you don't care that they, want to send the food back because of something slight,
Mhm.
uh, don't focus on it and don't let it bug you, right? Because
Right.
that's, I think, another big issue that can get into relationships is that focusing on the little bad things instead of the overwhelming good things can ruin a relationship faster than something significantly bad.
And that's really just the petty shit, right? So
Mhm.
really arguing about the petty stuff that doesn't really matter. It's actually a deep-rooted problem that you have that you're trying to bring up, but
Mhm.
you don't quite have the clarity or the courage to talk about it. So
Yeah,
you talk about the surface shit.
yeah,
Like you
and
didn't put the dishes in the dishwasher. Like you don't care about that. You care more about they're not thinking about you and
mhm.
how you like a clean space to feel more clean and clear and like they're doing their part. Right?
Absolutely.
That's the problem.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the number one thing that ended one of my most recent relationships was that
Dishes?
not necessarily dishes, but the
I
little
was like,
stuff.
dishes,
So it
really?
was she began really focusing and diving into really little things in our relationship that bugged her, and then making it
Mm,
into this really big story, regardless of the significant amount of things that we overcame together and like the significant amount of good stuff that we did together. The really petty little things became her main focus, and stuff that would never be fixable, right? And so it
mhm.
just drove this wedge deeper and deeper until it was not a fixable relationship anymore.
Right. Well, that's all cover stuff, right? There's
Mhm.
something deeper that wasn't really being discussed. And I know
Mhm.
when I was like, here's a business side of that story.
Yeah.
So I was working with a guy who's still a good friend and great, and we worked together for basically an entire year, and we were going to go into full business together.
Mhm.
And we were, co-founding a company. We actually got a bank account for it, signed papers, all that jazz.
Mhm.
And we're moving forward. And I had this feeling that he wasn't pulling his weight in certain areas. He just wanted to focus so much on um, stuff that he had been doing his whole time, which was like content. And I was like, we need to talk about sales. We need to talk about this. We need to talk
Yeah.
about like the business side of things, right? And he just wasn't able to respond or act on those things. And so I
Okay.
just felt like he didn't want to do this business together, but I also felt like I couldn't do this business by myself because I wasn't good enough, right? And so I
Okay.
had to have him in order to get like the sales. And that wasn't true at all, really. Um, so he finally had a conversation with me where he actually said, you know what? Because he's much older than I, and he was like, I'm on my way towards retirement and you are just scaling up and getting started. And so I think this is not going to be the best match for each other. And so I'm going to back out of this company. And I said, that's totally fine. And it was kind of that catching it early, but I wish I caught it earlier. Right. But I wasn't paying attention to the red flags in a way.
Yeah.
And so it kind of became a bigger deal down the road. And so it was just like, why are we're not going towards the deep issues. And I think this is kind of opening up to that vulnerability topic of really getting into a vulnerable state and saying what you're really feeling, which is fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, and talking about that with your partner and or business partner.
Absolutely. I find, though, a lot of the time, going back, if we're not aware, though, of what we're feeling, because it took me a long time, probably, especially working in retail, like I would just bury it, be like, I'm stressed, I'm angry, but got to do this. In a relationship, it's like, I'm stressed, I'm angry, but this is a relationship. They're always like this, They're
all supposed to be miserable and horrible and life draining. Eventually they'll kill you in your sleep. Yeah.
I feel like that's been a real narrative, honestly, for the last 40 years.
Yes. And it's also been romanticized in storytelling. And even in business, there's two sides to that. It's like you have, especially television today, it's so easy to get those stories across rather than reading or going to a play, right?
Yeah.
You're seeing these half-hour shows or even now 1 minute on TikToks. And so you're seeing these stories that they're showing this romantic life. And it's just this miserable, codependent, horrible relationship, really, with all of these issues. For key example, 50 Shades of Grey. All right. That was a huge deal, whatever years back, right? But it is such a toxic relationship if you really look at what's going on. And you just go, oh my God. But as men and women, we're soaking up that story because we're like, oh my gosh, the romance, because they're tortured for each other. Right.
Right.
And it's like, that's not necessarily good. You're not supposed to be tortured for each other. You're supposed to be attracting each other and working with each other. And yes, there'll be a tension, tug, pull, even in business. We have tension, tug, pull, especially because you're like, I want to do this. And I'm like, no. And then I'm like, let's do this. And you're like, no. Right.
But we talk about it tension. Is the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Communication is a big key. But there's this overall, there's supposed to be some sort of emotion at play with a relationship that brings anxiety and torture and just anger and jealousy and all this stuff. And it's that's good.
That's what trauma bonding is, actually. When you seek partners that are bad for you because you've had toxic partners in the past, so you tend to bond yourself to unhealthy people because it's better than being alone, essentially.
Which you kind of have to ask that question. Why don't you want to be alone even if it's temporary?
Yeah. Which is kind of, I think, where we're both at now is we are both okay being alone.
I've been okay with being alone for a very long time. Even when I was married, I'm like, I'm okay with being alone. No, really, I've never had this fear of being alone.
Yeah.
And so when people say I have a fear of being alone, because I was an only child, and so I was also homeschooled, and so I didn't go to school in my elementary and middle school years. So I had to really be with myself and have fun with myself, and so I'm very comfortable with being by myself, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't, and I have a hard time relating to that, but I get it. But I have a hard time relating to it, and so for me, I'm like, yeah, don't come near me. I'm fine with that. So being single, yeah, I'm totally used to this and it's fun and it's fine. But on my end, I'm actually more scared of being in a relationship than not. And maybe that's my Aquarius self coming in, where I'm a free spirit and I don't want anyone to control me, even though I attract people who try to control me.
Interesting.
So, right. That's all
Interesting play there.
So, it's just all fucked up in here. But yeah, so it's just like, it's this interesting tug and pull I have where like, I like to be alone. I'm kind of terrified to be out there, but I also want to be a free spirit. Don't control me. Right?
Love me. Don't love me. Come here, but not too close.
Yeah, exactly. So
look at me. Don't look at me. Look at me. Love me. Get away.
So, but for me, I am totally happy with being by myself, and I trust myself in lots of decisions, not all decisions. I don't think like we all can trust ourselves in every decision we make, but I do trust myself in my resourcefulness. So being by myself, I know I can be happy. I know I can do these things, right? But not everybody can do that or feel that way. And even in business, again, I'm fine with being by myself and being isolated and alone. It's fine. Being in a partnership, like with this last guy I was with years ago, the older gentleman, I was terrified. I was like, now I have to rely on someone else actually pulling their weight, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was terrifying to me. And he ended up not, so it was fine. So we just separated ways. But, you know, kind of going into this podcast relationship, you're pulling your weight. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm pulling my weight too, right? So I've learned the cycle. And so I'm learning the tug and pull relationship in this business relationship, right?
Yeah.
So the how-to, again, it's just about the courage to be okay with moving into a space you're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, totally. And knowing that it's okay that you don't know what you're doing when you're in that space.
100%.
It's like there's this common running theme to all of our episodes so far. It's the strangest thing.
I don't know what the fuck I'm doing it, but I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let me ask you, actually, when it came to the awareness factor, what gave you the idea that there even needed to be awareness?
What do you mean? In what instance?
Well, like there has to be a precursor to this awareness piece of the journey, right? So you're working retail, midnights, you're in this narcissistic relationship, right? But then all of a sudden you're like, I am aware that I'm in a horrible relationship, right?
Yeah.
Where did that awareness come from?
So a story that I like to tell, or an analogy, metaphor, allegory, whatever, is that so someone moves into a house and it's a brand new house, nice area, nice neighborhood. But every single night, he hears this horrible howling noise coming from his neighbor's house. And it's just like every night, it's just, it's just like an animal that's severely in pain, right? And so finally, the man goes over and knocks on his neighbor's door, and he's like, what is going on? Like, what is this noise coming from your house? The old man says, oh, that's just my dog. It's like, well, what's wrong with your dog? He's like, well, he's sitting on a little nail. And he's like, he's sitting on a nail? He's like, yeah. It's like, well, why doesn't he get up? And the old man says, well, he'll get up when it hurts enough. And so a lot of times, and myself, I was going through life just sitting on this nail, and it was just this constant pain, but I was so used to it. But finally, it hurt enough that I was like, I had to pay attention, and I had to see what was happening so that I could get this nail out of me, because I was just so, it got to the point I was so frustrated with a lot of things in my life.
Yeah, well, that's a great analogy. One thing that I find is interesting about this story, though, is that the nail also, there was a point where it wasn't there, then it was, and then it was too much pain, so then it decided to get off the nail. There are some people I have met, and you know, there's probably parts of me that I haven't discovered yet, where the nail has literally been there since you could possibly remember.
Yeah.
And so identifying the nail can be incredibly difficult.
Because right? You're so used to the pain.
Exactly. Or just it's a normal thing, right? Like and you've always had this.
What can actually happen is it's so weird to not be in pain that we go back and re-find the pain, because the pain is normal.
Feeling. And it's a feeling.
Yeah. And so not being in pain feels so weird that we have to go back and self-sabotage and get back into that uncomfortable state.
Isn't it interesting how we are addicted to emotions?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's why a lot of people do drugs. That's why we get into certain relationships. We do certain behaviors, is because we're literally addicted to that feeling.
Absolutely.
Which is like, look at yourself. What are you addicted to? What do you like? Or what do you seem to feed off of, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people feed off of drama.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like to feed off of gossip because it gives that wow factor, you know?
Or victimhood.
Or victimhood.
A lot of
like,
people,
oh, whoa, me.
Because then they're getting the attention, right?
Yeah, that's some family members of mine. And so, like,
All
you
of
know,
us.
so it's kind of, again, it's like, yeah, that, you know, instead of not knowing that there's a nail there, maybe asking the question of, what emotions am I really addicted to? What do I remember the most feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for me as a kid, like, I remember most like rejection from other kids, right?
Okay.
And
From
I
being
hated
homeschooled?
that feeling, though. Yeah, in a way. So I hated that feeling, though. And so it's like, that's definitely emotion I'm not addicted to, but what I am addicted to is kind of that feeling of isolation sometimes.
Okay.
And so, like, I get where we're coming at, but I'm like, wait, but Anastasia, you're okay with being by yourself? Yeah, because there's certain parts of that I'm addicted to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually not necessarily always unhealthy. But if I'm always,
are there times in your life that feeling, wanting that feeling of isolation more than connection, has that led to
exactly, and that's where it can
situations?
become unhealthy, right? And so it's really identifying when you're getting your fix, as I like to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're getting your fix on that emotion. So, like, codependence, it's like, you, like, there's some family members of mine that literally they have sought people to take care of, because no one can take care of them. They have to take care of others in order to feel like they're worthy enough, or they feel like they're living, right?
Which is a cycle I find myself getting into. I love taking care of people. Like,
You're so codependent.
I do. I'm just like, I want to make you so happy. Like, when people come over, I'm like, okay, do you have everything you need? I'm going to get this, this, and this, and make sure everything is comfortable. Like, on our trip, I was like, okay, some people are going to like tequila, some are going to like wine, some are going to like
bring it all.
Vodka, I'm going to get one of each, get these different food groups. Everyone's going to have everything they need.
Different food groups, like that. So, like, that can also look like a great host, right? Or very thoughtfulness, but when used in excessiveness, it becomes codependent. It becomes a statement of, please like me, right? Right. And so it's like, so again, it's like looking at behaviors that you do in excess and asking, why do I do that? Right. And, you know, it's that curiosity of awareness. I guess that's probably a great way to put that. Yeah. Curiosity of self and curiosity of what you could become aware of.
The state of curiousness, I think, is the most healthy state. Just like that childlike curiosity, because you're like, how does this work? How do I work? What happens if I do this? And it's not just testing for the sake of testing. It's testing to learn something and grow and expand your awareness and knowledge, whether it's internal or external. Right. And I think that's such a powerful word.
And I think this comes down to the action of stillness. And when they say stillness, people are like, what, do you just stand still? Kinda, yeah.
You can.
It's like, really? Because this act of stillness, like, when people would always say this, like, I'm getting still and meditating, or I'm like, whatever. I was always like, I don't understand what that means. Until I actually started wanting to be still rather than constantly moving all the time and feeling like I always had to be doing something because I'm a codependent person. Right. And so I finally, I guess the nail hurt so much. I finally was just like, I'm done feeling like I always need to be busy and doing things, because that keeps me distracted, which is a key word, distracted from looking at myself.
Yeah.
And so finally craving stillness and being alone so that I can identify what's going on within me. And so it's like, sometimes it's like looking for stillness rather than distraction.
Yeah. And I think that, I was just trying to think about it, but I think distraction might actually be the opposite of curious. instead of ignorance, right?
Yeah.
I think distraction is the actual opposite.
Oh yeah, I think that's self-sabotage in a lot of ways, right? It's like, oh, we're moving forward, even in a relationship, we're moving forward, and it's all of a sudden self-sabotage is like distraction. It's
Yeah.
like, ooh, shiny object syndrome, or whatever it may be.
Or it's like, I'm ramping up my business, I'm starting to get clients, but now I'm going to go start the second business.
Yeah, or 5 others. Yeah. Exactly. But, sometimes it's interesting because a lot of people feel like stopping something. So this kind of goes back to stopping relationships, like that. They feel like that's an act of failure. And it's like, sometimes you're getting rid of that distraction. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you're getting rid of that distraction, that emotional feed
or addiction
that you're addicted to.
Yeah.
To finally sit with yourself for a goddamn second and saying, I don't want that. There has to be something better. And that's that curious state.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I found for myself personally, I don't normally drive with any sound, with any radio or anything.
Really?
Yeah. And that's my quiet time. I love driving I really enjoy driving, and it's almost meditative to drive with.
Is this why you drive so slow?
Part of it, because I'm not in a hurry to get anywhere, and I'm just, I'm just chilling.
This is why you're always late. You're just meditating. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just, zenning out.
Seriously, for those who are listening or watching, it's like, it gets from point A to point B. It's like a 2.5 hour drive. 4 hours later.
Yeah, just because I go in slow lane, I'll get behind a big truck. They're going even slower.
You're like, yes, my favorite place on the highway, behind a big slow semi. Like, you're probably the first person I've ever identified that would do that.
Yeah, and because then I can see it and I can kind of zone out and just, the truck is so big and
guide me, truck, while I go into my zen.
And I'm like, I don't really want to try and speed up to go past it because there's other cars zooming by.
I'm thinking of cars from the Pixar movie, there's the semi that is always in every Pixar movie, that voice, Uh-huh. He carries Steve McQueen, and him is he takes him to all the races. Okay. I'm just imagining him driving in front of you, and you're just like, guide me, semi. Guide me. I love it. It's so funny.
Wise semi. Show me the way.
That makes sense, because it's kind of like the shower and the car.
Yeah, shower's the other one.
You have the best arguments in those places, right?
Yeah.
With your imaginary people.
Yeah. But what I'll find though is sometimes I will get into places where when I'm in my car, I need sound and I need music, and it's because I'm trying to hide, probably subconsciously, from something that I need to be dealing with.
Right.
Which is it's really neat, and it's something I'm aware of because I'm just so used to that situation. So it's
right. So that's really interesting, because I have driven many times in my car without music. So I would just kind of just be with my own thoughts. And no, I do actually do that quite often. I think it was I don't know, half of 2020 really was not listening to music. So I totally get that. I'm just surprised that you're I choose all the time not to listen to music.
It's more often than not.
I really don't want to think about things.
Yeah. And it's actually hard, because one of the best times to put on a podcast or put on something educational isn't when driving. And I'm just so in the habit of not turning anything on when I get in the car that I waste a lot of times I could be listening to something educational.
But it's also your time of stillness, and I think that's really important. It's really, again, kind of going back to the stillness so that you can become aware, right? That curiosity of discovery.
Yeah.
There you go. Coin that.
Curiosity of discovery.
Curiosity of discovery.
That'll be the title of our podcast, of this episode.
So what do you feel like is the overall message of what we have just discussed in so many rabbit holes today?
The overall message of what we just discussed is definitely that we don't know what we're talking about. And Don't listen to us.
We don't know what we're talking about. Well, hopefully we
Yeah.
did drop some gems for you. I feel like I got some gems today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do.
I think we just, as we go on, because we have really good conversations, and we're still kind of figuring out the play right now between conveying a message and like just conversing about things. And I think it's going to be neat as the episodes go on, where we're just like, it'll be more like a genuine us sitting together and having a real conversation that are mind blowing.
I just thought that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Because you just sparked it. Yay. So I actually think it'd be cool to end this podcast, maybe others in the future, but to ask each other, what did you learn from our conversation today?
Okay.
So David, what did you learn from our conversation today?
Can you go first?
No, that's why I asked you first. I didn't have to go first.
I want to ask this question, but I'm not ready to answer it yet.
No. But we all know that you like to do the divergent tactics mostly.
Yeah,
so I'm asking you first. Yeah,
really
this episode's all about getting David to talk. So,
So what did I learn? Long pause that can be edited out later. I learned that you are addicted to isolation. Ish. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not as much as I used to.
Yeah, but that's a neat thing because I never actually saw you as someone who likes to be alone. I feel like just the personality that you've conveyed is someone that likes people, but after knowing you, I definitely see that you do like to be alone. It's neat to see that that is kind of your natural state, and that's not something I think I knew about you before.
I think it's better to say I'm comfortable being
comfortable.
Alone. Right, I'm comfortable being alone or in isolation, I guess. Best word for that. Okay,
what's the number one
I
thing
like how your thing you learned was about me and not about yourself.
I thought that's what we were going for.
No. I'll
do better next time. Just kidding.
What I learned the most, being curious about any discovery is really good. And that's so true because going into things for yourself without certain expectations is when you really get the biggest rewards. Yeah. And so instead of going in and being like, I expect myself to heal from this in like 72 hours.
Yeah.
No. Just going in with like a curious childlike mind and saying, I'm wanting to really curious about any discovery I make in this moment. And
do you think expectation is the opposite of curiosity?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you think distraction is the...
Both. I think distraction and expectation can kind of interweave between each other.
Interesting.
And that's another conversation for a relationship episode. Expectations. Yeah. I have a lot to say on that.
Yeah. So
everyone's like, yeah.
In the 3 episodes, we'll talk about expectations in relationships.
Yeah, so stay tuned, everyone, for episode whatever that is.
6 or 7, maybe 7.
Somewhere.
Or maybe not, because we have, I don't know, we'll figure it out.
Just
keep listening
to our episodes. Just do it. Anyway, okay. So we have all learned a lot today, I feel like, from each other, and hopefully you as listeners or viewers have also learned something yourself. By the way, if you have learned something or you thought something was cool or you have insight on something else, put it in the comments if there's a comment section wherever this is at, or click subscribe by the way and those things, which are wherever.
Double tap to like.
What was that? Smash that button.
Smash that button. Ring that bell.
Ring that bell. Yeah, we've been watching YouTube, obviously.
Double tap to love it.
Double tap. Anyway, well, thanks for listening, guys. Our next episode is with Chad, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that'll be the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are interviewing Chad of Thrive Global, founder and owner.
Which is where I'm at this particular moment.
Yes. Normally we both are in Thrive Global, but hey, COVID, so no.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. I feel like we should have mentioned that probably before.
Should have mentioned that.
That we're normally actually in the same room.
Hey, we don't know what the fuck we're doing, so automatic cop out.
Best excuse ever. I don't know.
Oh yeah, slam. Okay.
So get our coffee mugs that say IDK WTF, and then you can just point to it.
Because merch is here, coming at some point.
It
It
might
probably is
come.
here already. Check it
It might
out.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really want
Ooh.
coffee mug merch. So.
Bye,
Okay.
guys.
Bye, everybody. You're my favorite people in the world. I'm going to start saying that from now on. I like that. Whoever you are, you're my favorite person.